Welcome to another episode of the Bark Brigade podcast by Doggozila Magazine.
It's great to be here.
So, okay, picture this. You take your highly energetic dog for like a 5-mile run. You are completely exhausted, your legs are burning, you're drenched in sweat, and you're just ready to collapse.
Oh, I've been there.
Right.
Yeah.
You get home, your dog drinks a bowl of water, maybe pants for a few minutes, and then immediately starts chewing a hole in your living room couch.
Classic.
Completely restless.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there wondering why. Well, it's because you only emptied half of their tank. Today, we're diving headfirst into a topic that affects, honestly, literally every single person who shares their life with a canine companion.
Yeah, it really does.
We're going to decode one of the most fundamental yet surprisingly misunderstood mysteries of pet ownership. Like, how do you actually know when your dog is tired? You might be thinking, well, they lie down, they close their eyes, and they go to sleep, right?
If only it were that easy.
Exactly. But as we're going to explore today in this deep dive, using an incredibly comprehensive guide from Doggozila Magazine, it is rarely that simple. Our mission today is to unpack the incredibly subtle physical cues that we miss, the behavioral shifts that we almost always misinterpret, and the cutting-edge science behind canine sleep, cognitive exhaustion, and physical recovery.
And it is such a critical topic. I mean, I am incredibly glad we're dedicating this time to really tear this subject apart layer by layer. Because what we find time and time again in veterinary and behavioral practices is that well-meaning, loving owners are completely missing the signs.
Right, because they just don't know what to look for.
Exactly. We have this pervasive cultural idea that, a tired dog is a good dog. And as a result, we push our pets, and they eagerly push themselves way past healthy biological limits. Today, we're going to look at the real data, the physiological mechanisms, and the real-world stories that show us exactly why this happens.
And how to prevent it.
Yes, and in the process, we are going to completely dismantle some deeply ingrained myths about canine energy.
I am so ready for this. We're going to be busting some major myths today, including why the legendary zoomies absolutely do not mean what you think they mean, and why taking your restless dog for a marathon walk might actually leave them even more frustrated than when you started.
It's totally counterintuitive.
It is a completely counterintuitive concept. But once you see the science and the biology behind it, I guarantee it will change the way you interact with your dog forever. Let's start right at the beginning, with the physical realities of playtime. The source material makes a really bold statement right out of the gate. It points out that dogs, much like us sometimes, often just do not know their own breaking point.
They don't.
They will just keep playing, running, fetching, and wrestling until they literally drop.
Yeah, and that is a fundamental behavioral trait in many, many dogs. It's rooted deeply in their evolutionary history. You have to remember where dogs come from. In a wild pack setting or, in a survival situation, showing fatigue or pain is a massive vulnerability.
Oh, like showing weakness to a predator.
Exactly. Modern dogs have retained that instinct to mask their exhaustion. Plus, they are heavily driven by pack dynamics, by intensely bred prey drives, and honestly, by the sheer, unadulterated joy of interacting with you, their owner.
They just love the game too much.
Right. When you throw a ball, their brain is flooded with a massive cocktail of adrenaline, cortisol, and dopamine. This neurochemical wave essentially acts as an internal painkiller. It masks their physical fatigue. The Doggozila article highlights that recognizing the early signs of dog exhaustion is the key to stepping in before your dog becomes overstressed or physically hurt.
So we have to be the ones to call the timeout.
We have to be the adults in the room, so to speak, because the dog is not going to do it. They are relying entirely on us to read their physical cues, and those cues can be incredibly subtle.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's unpack those cues. We all know the obvious ones, like a dog just stopping and refusing to walk. But the sources list a few key physical cues that happen way before that point of total failure. They mention heavy panting, excessive yawning, lying with legs stretched completely out, and a sudden loss of interest in toys or treats. Let's start with panting.
Good place to start.
Because a dog panting at the dog park is the most normal, ubiquitous thing in the world. How do we distinguish between healthy, normal, evaporative cooling and the kind of heavy distress panting that signals a massive red flag?
This is where we have to look closely at the mechanics of how a dog cools down. Dogs do not sweat through their skin like humans do. I mean, they only have a few sweat glands in their paw pads, which do very little for overall temperature regulation.
Right.
They rely almost entirely on evaporating moisture from their respiratory tract. When a dog is engaging in functional panting, their mouth is open, their tongue might be slightly out, and their breathing is elevated, but it is rhythmic. It's controlled. They are efficiently drawing air over the wet surfaces of their tongue and lungs.
Okay, so what does distress panting look like?
Distress panting, the heavy panting the article warns about, looks and sounds entirely different. You are looking for panting that is rapid, shallow, and seemingly uncontrollable. The tongue won't just be out. It will be fully extended, often hanging far out to the side.
Like completely floppy.
Yeah, and it might even look wider or flatter than normal as the body tries to expose as much surface area as possible. If the dog cannot seem to catch their breath even when they stop moving for a minute, they are no longer just cooling down. They're struggling to regulate their core temperature.
Wow.
The cardiovascular system is working in absolute overdrive, and they are firmly in the danger zone of exhaustion.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It is the difference between, you or me breathing hard after a light jog versus hyperventilating after sprinting up a flight of stairs. Now, what about yawning? I always thought yawning just meant a dog was waking up from a nap, or maybe they were a little bored waiting for me to finish talking to a neighbor.
A lot of people think that.
But the source material specifically flags excessive yawning as a sign of exhaustion.
Yes, and this is a classic, fascinating example of a canine behavior that has multiple, entirely different meanings depending on the context. Yawning is indeed a natural way for dogs to stretch their facial muscles and relax. But in the context of high activity, excessive yawning is what behavioralists call a displacement behavior.
Right.
It is a sign of sheer exhaustion and often of rising internal stress.
Wait, before we move on, for those of us who aren't behavioralists, when you say displacement behavior, what exactly does that mean?
Great question. A displacement behavior is a normal behavior displayed out of context, usually triggered by conflicting emotions or an overwhelmed nervous system.
Like a nervous habit.
Exactly. Think of a human who is incredibly nervous before a public speech, and they start subconsciously scratching their arm or aggressively adjusting their collar. They aren't itchy, and their collar isn't tight. Their nervous system is just overwhelmed, and the physical action is a way to bleed off some of that anxious energy.
Well, that makes total sense.
For dogs, yawning is a primary displacement behavior. When a dog is pushed past their physical or mental limit, their parasympathetic nervous system is trying to forcefully hit the brakes. The yawn is an involuntary physical response to that internal stress.
So if they're doing it in the middle of a game?
Right. If you are at the park or in the middle of a vigorous training session and your dog starts repeatedly yawning, they are not bored. They are literally telling you, I am overwhelmed, my tank is empty, I cannot process any more stimuli, and I desperately need a break.
That is such a vital distinction. It completely changes how you view a dog yawning during, say, agility training. And the source also mentions lying with legs stretched out. Not curled up in a cute little ball, but completely sprawled, often on a hard surface.
Exactly. When a dog lies completely sprawled out with their legs fully extended, especially on a cool surface like tile or shaded dirt, they are attempting to maximize the surface area of their body that is in contact with the ground.
Just trying to get as much cool contact as possible.
Right. It's a physics concept called thermal conduction. They are trying to dump their excess body heat into the cooler ground as rapidly as possible. It is a clear, undeniable sign of a depleted energy state and an overheating core. And this directly pairs with the sudden loss of interest the article mentions.
Like ignoring a toy.
Yeah, if your extremely ball-obsessed dog suddenly ignores the tennis ball bouncing right past their nose or refuses a high-value treat like a piece of chicken, you need to pay immediate attention. Their body has hit a critical physiological threshold where it has prioritized vital survival and a recovery over play and food.
That brings us to checking the vitals, which is something I think a lot of pet owners assume you only do at the vet's office. But the Doggozila guide gives us some very practical at-home vitals to check. First, the gums. It says that if a dog's gums are pale or pink, it is a sign that they may be dehydrated and tired. Now, we usually think of pink as a healthy color, so we are talking about a washed-out pale pink, right? How do we actually check this properly?
You are looking for a noticeable shift from their normal baseline. A healthy dog's gums should be a vibrant, rich color, often a bubblegum pink, though obviously it varies by breed. And some dogs have naturally pigmented black gums.
Sure.
But if you have a dog with pink gums, you are looking for a washed-out, pale, almost white appearance. To really test this, you can perform what is called a capillary refill time test.
Okay, how do we do that?
You gently lift your dog's lip, Press your thumb firmly against their gum for a second until the tissue under your thumb turns white, and then release it. In a healthy, well-hydrated, rested dog, the vibrant pink color should rush back into that spot almost instantly, usually within 1 to 2 seconds.
And if it doesn't?
If the color takes 3, 4, or 5 seconds to return, or if the gums just stay a dull, pale pink, it indicates extremely poor capillary refill and a severe lack of proper blood flow.
Why does the blood flow stop like that?
It's a survival mechanism. When a dog is severely dehydrated or entering a state of acute exhaustion, their cardiovascular system essentially goes into triage mode.
Oh, wow.
The body constricts the blood vessels in the extremities, the skin, the paws, the mucous membranes in the mouth, and forcefully pulls that blood inward to support and protect the vital organs like the heart, lungs, and brain. So if you lift your dog's lip and see that pale color and slow refill time, it is an immediate, non-negotiable signal to stop all activity, get them into the shade, and slowly offer them water.
And then there's the body temperature. The article states that a normal dog temperature is between 100 and 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything higher than that means they're overheated and tired. That is significantly higher than a human's normal temperature.
It is, and understanding that baseline is critical. Because their normal resting temperature is already hovering between 100 and 102 degrees, they have incredibly little leeway before they hit dangerous, life-threatening territory. Heat stroke in dogs can begin when their core temperature reaches 104 or 105 degrees.
Okay, wait. If their normal is 102 and heat stroke happens around 104 or 105, that is a terrifyingly narrow window. Are you saying we only have a 2 or 3 degree margin of error before our dogs are in severe medical distress?
That is exactly what I'm saying. Humans have a wider margin and an incredibly efficient full-body sweating mechanism to dump heat. Dogs have a very narrow thermal window and a highly inefficient cooling system. Their internal engine runs hotter than ours to begin with, which is why they overheat exponentially faster than we expect.
That's scary.
It is. Now, obviously, carrying a rectal thermometer to the dog park to check their temperature might not be practical or comfortable for everyone, but knowing the biological reality of that narrow 2-degree window helps us understand why we must be hyper-vigilant about the external signs like panting and gum color.
It really paints a picture of how fragile their limits can be. But let me throw an analogy at you, because the psychology of this is what truly fascinates me. We have all these physical warning signs: the excessive distress panting, the displacement stress yawning, the pale gums showing blood rushing to the organs, the sprawling on the cold ground.
Right.
Yet despite all of that biological alarm ringing, the dog will often jump right back up if you pull the tennis ball out of your pocket one more time.
It reminds me of a toddler at a busy birthday party.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
The kid is rubbing their eyes, they are crying over a dropped napkin, they are stumbling around, clearly fighting off sleep with every fiber of their being. But if you offer them another piece of cake or point to the bouncy castle, they will scream, "I'm not tired," and run right back into the chaos. Why do dogs ignore their own bodily warning signs during play? What is happening in their brains that overrides survival? That toddler analogy is remarkably accurate. What is happening inside the dog is a literal battle between neurochemistry and physical biology, and honestly, neurochemistry almost always wins in the short term.
Wow.
When a dog is engaged in something highly stimulating, like chasing a ball, playing roughly with other dogs, or even just exploring a highly novel environment, their brain's reward centers light up. They are flooded with dopamine, which drives the desire to seek the reward alongside huge spikes of adrenaline and cortisol.
So they're just high on their own supply.
Basically, yeah. These are powerful, activating fight-or-flight chemicals. Evolutionarily, they are designed to keep the animal alert, moving, and ignoring pain in life-or-death survival situations, like fleeing a predator or securing a rare meal. But the dog's brain doesn't differentiate between the life-or-death pursuit of a rabbit and the intensely fun pursuit of a frisbee.
It's all the same chemical rush.
Exactly. The chemical cocktail applies equally to high arousal play. It completely masks the physical sensations of muscle fatigue, joint ache, and rising core temperature. The brain is aggressively screaming, "Go, go, go," while the cellular biology of the body is screaming, "Stop." And until those chemical levels naturally dissipate, which takes time, the dog will keep pushing, often to their own severe detriment.
So there is a literal chemical disconnect between their body and their brain. Their physical body is running on empty, but their brain is still revving at 10,000 RPMs.
Right.
Which brings us perfectly to the next major concept in the source material. And honestly, if there's one thing our listeners take away from this entire deep dive, it should be this. It is a game changer for anyone who has ever dealt with a restless, hyperactive pet. we need to talk about the two cups of energy, the profound difference between physical and mental exhaustion.
This is undoubtedly one of the most crucial paradigms to understand in modern dog care. For decades, the conventional wisdom was just, run them until they're tired. But the Doggozila article introduces a much more accurate model. A dog's energy is not just one single monolithic tank.
Okay.
It is strictly divided into two separate reservoirs, a body cup and a brain cup. And the single biggest mistake owners make day in and day out is trying to solve a full brain cup with a purely physical solution.
Yes. The source gives this incredible illustrative story about a high-energy border collie named Scout. I think anyone with a working breed will relate to this. Scout's owner was incredibly dedicated. They were running him for miles every single day, trying desperately to tire him out.
Doing exactly what people tell you to do.
Right. They were doing exactly what society and old-school training tells you to do with a working breed. Run them until their tongue hangs out. But despite logging all those miles, Scout was coming home, drinking some water, and then immediately chewing the sofa. He was pacing, he was restless, he was destructive, and he was clearly deeply unsatisfied. The physical walk only emptied his body cup.
Exactly.
The solution, according to the trainer in the story, wasn't to run him for 6 miles instead of 5. It was swapping a massive physical run for a simple 20-minute indoor sniffing game, hiding treats in a cardboard box. And that 20 minutes of focused brain work made Scout calmer and happier than any long one ever did. How is that biologically possible?
It is entirely possible, and it comes down to the staggering neurology behind olfactory processing in dogs. To understand this, we have to look at the anatomy of a dog's brain. Humans are what we call a microsmatic species. We rely primarily on our vision. Dogs are macrosmatic. Their primary dominant way of interpreting the entire world is through their sense of smell.
They see with their noses.
They absolutely do. A dog's nose contains up to 300 million olfactory receptors, compared to our measly 6 million. Furthermore, the part of their brain dedicated to analyzing odors, the olfactory bulb, is proportionally massive compared to ours. When Scout the Border Collie was out running for miles, he was engaging in a repetitive, low cognitive load activity. Running is purely physical endurance.
Right.
His body cup was getting thoroughly empty, but his brain cup, his deeply ingrained genetic need to problem solve, to analyze data, to work out puzzles, was completely untouched. In fact, by running him for miles every day, the owner was inadvertently just building up his cardiovascular stamina.
Right. Like a human athlete training for a marathon. You aren't actually calming them down. You are just making them vastly fitter and harder to physically tire out over time.
Precisely. You create an elite endurance athlete with an incredibly bored mind. But when the owner introduced the sniffing game with treats hidden in a box, everything shifted. Sniffing for a hidden target requires intense, sustained concentration.
Like solving a complex math problem for us.
Yes. The dog has to inhale the air, trap the scent particles in their nasal cavity, separate the target odor from hundreds of background odors, track the invisible scent gradient through the air currents in the room, and make complex split-second decisions based on that data. That level of intense mental focus requires immense cognitive fuel. It forces the brain to burn circulating glucose at an incredibly rapid rate.
So it's exhausting.
Incredibly exhausting. 20 minutes of intense scent work or thoughtfully interacting with a complex puzzle toy can be vastly more exhausting for a dog's central nervous system than an hour of mindless running. It forcefully empties that brain cup.
So it's almost like a smartphone. You can drain the battery by leaving the screen brightness on full blast. That is the equivalent of the physical run. You are burning raw power. But if you have 50 different apps open in the background, your phone's RAM is completely overloaded.
That's a perfect analogy.
The phone might be down to 10% battery, but it is still glitching, freezing, and running hot because the RAM is maxed out. These mental games, the sniffing, the puzzle feeders, the shaping games, they are the equivalent of swiping up and force closing all those background apps. They clear the RAM, and suddenly the system can actually power down, cool off, and relax. So I have to ask you, are we actually doing our high-energy dogs a massive disservice by only focusing on their physical stamina?
Without a doubt, yes. We are absolutely doing them a disservice. When we only focus on the physical aspect of exhaustion, we are entirely neglecting the very cognitive traits these dogs were selectively bred for over hundreds of years.
Like border collies herding sheep.
Exactly. Think about it. A border collie like Scout wasn't bred to just run in a straight line. They were bred to independently analyze the complex movements of a flock of sheep, to anticipate the sheep's reactions, to make independent problem-solving decisions, and to respond to highly nuanced whistle commands from a shepherd half a mile away.
That's a lot of brain power.
It is. A physical run around the neighborhood does absolutely nothing to satisfy that intense genetic urge to work. When we ignore the brain cup, we inevitably end up with restless, anxious, frustrated, and often highly destructive dogs. True, restorative relaxation for a dog only occurs when both the physical body cup and the cognitive brain cup are sufficiently emptied. And as the Doggozila source notes, veterinarians and behavioralists constantly see this full, overflowing brain cup as one of the very top reasons for a restless, unmanageable pet.
That is just a profound shift in perspective. It really empowers owners to work smarter, not harder, especially on days when they can't manage a 2-hour hike. But of course, not every dog is a working line border collie like Scout.
Right.
The absolute size of these energy cups varies wildly depending on who the dog actually is physically, which brings us to a huge variable: breed, build, and age. Why fatigue is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all equation. The Doggozila piece emphasizes that genetics, bone structure, body composition, and age dictate a dog's rest needs in very absolute, non-negotiable terms.
It is essential to recognize that a dog is not just a dog. A greyhound and an English bulldog are technically the exact same species, but physiologically, biomechanically, and anatomically, they are operating in entirely different realities. You cannot apply the same exercise metrics to them.
It just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. The source specifically calls out brachycephalic breeds. These are the flat-faced dogs that are so incredibly popular right now, like French bulldogs, pugs, English bulldogs, and Shih Tzus. These breeds have severe anatomical limitations that directly and dramatically impact their energy levels and how rapidly they fatigue.
I'm really glad we are focusing on these flat-faced breeds because they are everywhere and they have such goofy, playful personalities that I think owners sometimes forget their physical limits. The article points out that these dogs need constant extra rest periods during play because they literally struggle to breathe efficiently. Can you walk us through the actual anatomy of why this happens?
Certainly. The term brachycephalic translates literally to short-headed. Through decades of intense selective breeding for a specific cosmetic look, humans have drastically shortened the muzzles of these dogs. But while the bones of the snout got shorter, the soft tissues inside did not proportionally shrink.
So everything is cramped inside.
Exactly. This leads to a condition called brachycephalic airway syndrome. It means their nasal passages are severely compressed, their nostrils are often pinched or stenotic, and they frequently have elongated soft palates, which is excess tissue at the back of the throat that literally flaps down and obstructs their airway when they try to breathe deeply.
So every breath is a struggle.
Every single breath. Now compare that to a high-energy working dog like a Labrador Retriever or a Belgian Malinois. When a Malinois runs and pants, they have a long, fully functional snout that acts as a highly efficient aerodynamic cooling tunnel. They can easily draw in a massive volume of air, cool it rapidly across the large surface area of their nasal turbinates, and expel the heat from their body.
And a pug just can't do that.
A pug or a French bulldog simply does not possess that equipment. Their oxygen intake is severely compromised from the very first step. This means their muscles fatigue exponentially faster because they aren't getting sufficient oxygen to fuel cellular activity, and their core cooling system is horribly inefficient. Therefore, a vigorous 5-minute chase for a pug is physiologically and cardiovascularly equivalent to a grueling 30-minute sprint for a working dog. They hit their absolute physical limit incredibly fast.
And it isn't just the flat faces. The source also mentions heavy breeds, like bull mastiffs and basset hounds. They have a completely different kind of limitation, based purely on their skeletal mass and body shape.
That is correct. We have to look at canine biomechanics. Take a basset hound. They were bred for a highly specific purpose: slow, methodical, nose-to-the-ground tracking. To achieve this, they were bred to have dwarfism, extremely short, thick legs, and a long, dense, heavy body. The sheer biomechanical effort required for a basset hound to run, or even just to walk long distances at a brisk human pace, is massive compared to a dog with longer legs and a lighter, more aerodynamic frame. And then you look at giant muscular breeds like bull mastiffs. They carry so much sheer physical mass that just initiating movement and carrying that weight requires an enormous sustained expenditure of energy.
They're just moving so much weight.
Their muscles tire quickly, and their joints bear a tremendously heavy load. They were historically bred for short, explosive bursts of guarding behavior, not for sustained, high-intensity cardio. If you try to take a Mastiff on a 5-mile jog, you are going to destroy their joints and completely exhaust them.
So we have the physical build, but the source also dives deeply into age factors, looking at the two extreme ends of a dog's life.
Huh.
Growing puppies, and aging seniors. It points out that puppies have a seemingly endless amount of energy, but they actually tire incredibly quickly. And just like human babies, they get incredibly cranky and chaotic when they are overstimulated.
That is a wonderful, highly accurate comparison. People often assume puppies need constant exercise to burn off their energy. But a puppy's central nervous system is still highly immature and rapidly developing. Every single thing they encounter, a leaf blowing across the yard, a new sound from the television, a strange person, is a massive influx of novel sensory data.
Just overwhelming for them.
Exactly. Processing all that data fills up their cognitive brain cup incredibly quickly. When they cross the fragile threshold from being tired to being overtired, they completely lose the ability to self-regulate. They become mouthy, they bite, they bark uncontrollably, they refuse to settle down, they essentially throw a canine tantrum. They desperately need enforced naps in a quiet space, exactly like a human toddler, to allow their nervous system to reset.
Okay, let's shift gears to the exact opposite end of the spectrum. We have a huge population of aging dogs, and the prompt for today's deep dive specifically asks us to focus on identifying fatigue in senior dogs and explaining exactly when sleep pattern changes warrant a veterinary consultation. The article notes that older dogs naturally sleep more as they age, which makes sense. But how do we differentiate between normal, healthy senior dog fatigue and something far more serious?
This is a critical area of canine care because senior dogs are absolute masters at quietly adapting to their own decline, which means owners often miss the subtle signs. As dogs age, their baseline metabolic rate naturally slows down. Their cellular regeneration isn't as efficient, and they often experience sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss.
So they just naturally need more rest.
Yes. So the simple fact that an older dog needs more sleep is entirely biologically normal. An 8-year-old dog might comfortably sleep 14 hours a day, while a 14-year-old dog might require 18 hours. The crucial metric you have to monitor isn't just the sheer volume of sleep, but the pattern and the quality of that rest, and how they behave when they are awake.
So if my 12-year-old golden retriever is sleeping all day, I shouldn't automatically panic, but I need to watch how he acts when he finally gets up.
Precisely. Let's look closely at the 2024 veterinary checklist for senior dog fatigue that the Doggozila article highlights. The absolute most important metric on that list is what veterinarians call the bounce-back factor.
The bounce-back factor. Okay.
Let's say your senior dog goes for a gentle, slow, 15-minute sniff walk around the block. They come home, they are clearly tired, and they sleep deeply for 3 hours. The critical question is, when they wake up from that nap, do they stretch, wander into the kitchen looking for water, wag their tail when you speak to them, and show immediate interest in a high-value treat?
Like a piece of cheese or a favorite toy.
Exactly. If they wake up and show that normal engaged interest, then their fatigue was just healthy, age-appropriate tiredness. The nap successfully recharged their battery, they bounced back. However, if your older dogs start sleeping 18 hours a day, and when they do wake up, they seem disoriented, they stare blankly at walls, they refuse their favorite treats, or they seem reluctant to move, that is no longer normal aging. That is pathological lethargy.
What could be causing that kind of pathological lethargy?
It could be a myriad of things. Often what owners perceive as fatigue in a senior dog is actually untreated joint pain. Osteoarthritis is incredibly common, and dogs will simply choose to sleep rather than move because moving hurts. Or a sudden increase in sleep paired with disorientation could be a sign of canine cognitive dysfunction, which is essentially dog dementia.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is. It could also be heart disease, where their heart isn't pumping enough oxygenated blood, leaving them perpetually weak. Or it could be an endocrine issue, like hypothyroidism, which drastically tanks their energy levels. So, to answer the question directly, if your senior dog's sleep needs increase very suddenly over the course of a few weeks, or if their increased sleep is paired with a loss of appetite, reluctance to walk, or behavioral changes upon waking, you absolutely must schedule a veterinary consultation. It is a clinical red flag, not just a byproduct of getting older.
That bounce-back factor is such an incredibly helpful, tangible rule of thumb for owners to use at home. I do want to mention the guide wonderfully balances this very serious, heavy advice with some real-world humor. They mention a viral TikTok from March 2025 featuring Nikita Hanna, the so-called dramatic dachshund.
Oh, I've seen that.
This tiny little puppy went massively viral for putting on an incredibly dramatic, theatrical show of being completely and utterly exhausted. She was lying dramatically on her back, sighing heavily, throwing her paws over her face, acting like she had just run a marathon, after doing absolutely nothing all day.
It is a very humorous anecdote, but it serves a great purpose. It highlights how much individual variation there is among dogs and how uniquely expressive they can be about their perceived energy levels, even if, in Nikita Hana's case, she was clearly just being dramatic for attention. But it underscores the point. You have to know your dog's baseline. You have to adapt your care routine to the dog that is actually sitting in front of you, with all their specific breed quirks, age limitations, and dramatic personalities, not the generic dog you imagine you have.
And adapting to the reality of the dog brings us to a critical, potentially life-saving topic. We need to discuss the environment. The Force makes it emphatically clear that while breed and age dictate a lot of a dog's base stamina, the actual weather acts as an instant, brutal multiplier for exhaustion. Hot weather increases canine exhaustion incredibly rapidly. Why does hot weather cause such rapid exhaustion in dogs compared to us?
It cannot be overstated how profoundly dangerous ambient heat is for dogs. Humans are exceptional, elite thermoregulators. As long as we are hydrated, we can sweat over our entire massive body surface area, and as that sweat evaporates, it dramatically cools our skin and our blood. Dogs, as we discussed earlier, rely almost entirely on panting. When the ambient temperature of the air around them rises, especially when the humidity in the air rises, panting becomes less and less effective.
Because the air is already full of water.
Exactly. Evaporative cooling only works if the moisture from the dog's tongue and lungs can actually evaporate into the surrounding air. If it is highly humid, the air is saturated. The moisture has nowhere to go, so the dog pants harder and harder, expending massive amounts of physical energy to move air, but achieving absolutely zero cooling effect.
That sounds terrifying.
Their internal core temperature begins to skyrocket. Their heart races to try to pump cooler blood to the brain, and their organs begin to suffer from thermal damage.
The source shares a deeply sobering real-life news story to illustrate just how fast this happens. A tragic story from August 2025 about an English bulldog. A dog walker took this bulldog out for a walk during the day and then returned and left the exhausted dog in a living room to rest. The temperature in that living room was 27 degrees Celsius, which is about 81 degrees Fahrenheit. For a human, 81 degrees is just a nice, slightly warm summer day. You might wear shorts, but the dog tragically died from overheating right there in the living room, simply resting on the floor. It's a devastating warning that a tired dog can rapidly become a dog in mortal danger, and that preventing overexertion is far, far better than trying to cure heat exhaustion.
It is a heartbreaking story, and it perfectly, tragically illustrates the compounding, cascading dangers of breed, activity, and environment. You take a brachycephalic breed, the English bulldog, that already has a severely compromised, inefficient airway. You add the physical exertion and muscle heat generated from a walk, and you place them in an environment with an ambient temperature of 81 degrees.
It's just a perfect storm.
Exactly. During the walk, the dog's internal core temperature spiked. And because of their highly inefficient cooling system, combined with the ambient heat in the room, they simply could not bring their core temperature back down once they were inside. Their body could not dump the heat faster than it was being generated. Over the course of an hour or two, their proteins began to denature, their brain swelled, and their vital organs systematically began to shut down. This is why the Doggozila article emphatically stresses that avoiding extreme weather is paramount. On warm or humid days, walks must be kept extremely short, strictly limited to the coolest, earliest parts of the morning or late evening, with constant unrestricted access to fresh water and air conditioning.
The guide also provides a very practical mathematical tool for owners to check if their dog is crossing into this danger zone. It teaches us how to calculate a resting breath rate. This is such actionable advice. Can you explain exactly how to do this and what the numbers mean?
Absolutely. This is a vital metric for any dog owner to know. You wait until your dog is lying down and has been resting for a few minutes. You get a stopwatch or use your phone. You simply watch their chest rise and fall, and you count the number of full breaths they take for exactly 15 seconds. Then you multiply that number by 4 to get their breaths per minute.
So if I count 5 breaths in 15 seconds, 5 times 4 is 20 breaths per minute.
Correct. And a normal, healthy resting breath rate for most dogs is generally between 15 and 30 breaths per minute. The article clearly states that a resting rate consistently over 40 breaths per minute signals a serious potential medical problem. But the absolutely key word here is resting.
Right, because if they just finished sprinting, obviously they will be breathing faster.
Exactly. If your dog has just been running, their respiratory rate will naturally be high. But if they have been lying down on the cool tile for 10 or 15 minutes after a walk, their respiratory rate should be steadily and visibly declining toward their normal baseline. If you do that 15-second count, multiply by 4, and find that they are still taking 40, 50, or 60 shallow breaths a minute while lying completely still, they are in acute distress.
Wow.
They are not recovering. Their cardiovascular system is failing to bring their core temperature down. This is the exact moment you need to employ active cooling measures.
What do active cooling measures look like? I've heard you shouldn't use freezing cold ice water.
That's right, never use ice water as it causes the blood vessels in the skin to instantly constrict, trapping the heat inside the vital organs. You want to apply cool, tepid, wet towels to the hairless areas of their body, the groin, the armpits, the belly. Offer small sips of cool water, turn a fan directly on them, and immediately contact a veterinary emergency clinic.
So what does this all mean for our summer routines? We clearly have to completely shift our mindset. Let me offer an analogy to put it in perspective for you, our listeners. If you've ever tried to run a 5K in August, imagine doing it wearing a heavy, insulated winter snowsuit. And to make it worse, you have a tiny plastic straw in your mouth, and you are only allowed to breathe through that straw. That intense feeling of suffocation and trapped heat, that is exactly what a dog, especially a thick-coated or flat-faced dog, is experiencing on a hot, humid summer day.
That analogy hits the nail squarely on the head. You would never, ever push yourself in a snowsuit under the blazing summer sun, yet we routinely expect our dogs to trot happily alongside us under the exact same physiological strain. It is entirely our responsibility to check the weather app, check the humidity index, and actively monitor our dog's breathing. Preventing overexertion by simply staying inside and playing mental games is so much easier and safer than trying to reverse the devastating cascade of heat stroke.
Okay, so let's assume we've navigated the day successfully. We managed their physical energy, we engaged their brain with those intense sniffing games to empty the cognitive cup, we respected their specific breed limits, and we kept them safe from the brutal summer heat. The dog finally crashes on the rug in the living room, their eyes close. Now their body has to actually repair itself, what is happening in their brain right at that moment. This brings us to the science of dog sleep, dreams, and the zoomies. I think this might be my absolute favorite part of the deep dive because the science here is truly wild.
The scientific understanding of canine sleep architecture has absolutely exploded in recent years. For a very long time, scientists and owners just assumed sleep was sleep, a simple biological off switch to let the muscles rest. But the Doggozila article highlights that dogs, much like humans, have highly distinct complex sleep cycles. And deep REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is absolutely biologically vital for their mental and physical health.
The source brings up a landmark 2017 study from Hungary that completely blew my mind. It found that dogs actually process complex emotions and consolidate learning during their sleep. The article beautifully states that a sleeping dog isn't just recharging their physical body. Their brain is actively sorting the complex feelings and events of the day. They're literally sleeping on the fun you had together, which helps them wake up feeling emotionally secure and bonded to you. Can you elaborate on how researchers even figured this out?
It was an incredible piece of science. The researchers in Hungary actually managed to map exactly what happens in a dog's brain while they sleep, and doing this was no small feat. They had to train a group of family dogs, using entirely positive reinforcement over many weeks, to lie perfectly still and naturally fall asleep in a busy laboratory setting, with tiny, non-invasive EEG electrodes glued to their heads to measure their brain waves.
Wow. Getting my dog to sleep with things stuck to his head sounds impossible.
It took immense patience. But what they discovered was profound. They found that dogs experience sleep cycles remarkably similar to human sleep architecture, including periods of slow-wave sleep and deep REM sleep. But the most crucial finding was regarding memory consolidation. During the day, when you teach your dog a new command, or they have a highly stimulating social interaction at the park, those experiences are temporarily stored in a part of the brain called the hippocampus.
Right, like a short-term memory cache on a computer.
Perfect analogy. But that cache fills up quickly. It's during that deep REM sleep that the brain essentially replays those events. The researchers literally observed electrical spikes on the EE, called sleep spindles, that correspond to the brain transferring that data from the short-term hippocampus to the cerebral cortex for permanent long-term storage.
That's amazing.
But it isn't just cold data. It is emotionally tagged. The Hungarian study proved that this memory consolidation is tied heavily to emotional processing. So if a dog has a positive, enriching, safe day, their REM sleep helps neurologically cement those feelings of safety and bond with their owner. Conversely, if you wake a dog during this deep, vulnerable REM stage, they haven't finished that vital neurological housekeeping. They wake up confused, disoriented, and often highly cranky.
And speaking of sleep profoundly affecting mood and health, there's even more data. The article cites a 2022 study of laboratory dogs showing that sleep deprivation makes them acutely anxious and less clear-headed. And there is even newer research showing that just one single night of lost sleep ruins a dog's metabolism and makes their body significantly less responsive to insulin in a very short amount of time.
That is terrifying. One night of bad sleep impacts their actual cellular health.
It underlines the absolute fact that sleep is not a luxury. It is a strict biological imperative. The insulin study is particularly groundbreaking because it shows how incredibly quickly a lack of rest degrades the endocrine system. Hold on, before we dive deeper into that, for those of us who aren't veterinarians, when you say the endocrine system, what exactly are we talking about in the context of a tired dog?
Great clarification. Think of the endocrine system as the body's chemical communication network. It is a system of glands that release hormones directly into the bloodstream to regulate metabolism, growth, and stress responses. When a dog is constantly kept awake by household noise or lacks a comfortable, safe place to sleep, their body perceives that lack of rest as a threat.
So they're just constantly on edge.
Exactly. Their autonomic nervous system triggers the release of stress hormones, primarily cortisol, to keep them alert. If cortisol stays elevated because they aren't sleeping deeply, it actively prevents their cells from properly utilizing insulin to absorb glucose from their blood. Essentially, their body enters a pre-diabetic state of metabolic stress very rapidly. This leads directly to weight gain, chronic lethargy, and a cascading series of other health issues.
It is amazing how interconnected it all is. Let's talk about how this sleep processing actually manifests in the real world, because the source shares two incredible illustrative stories about Bella and Gus. Let's start with Gus the Labrador. He was apparently famous for falling asleep with a stuffed duck in his mouth. One evening, he drifts off. His paws start twitching rapidly, which is a classic visible sign of REM sleep, and suddenly his jaws start making a gentle, rhythmic chewing sound.
That's so funny.
He wakes up, looks down at his empty mouth with a totally confused, bewildered stare, and frantically searches for the stuffed duck that had fallen aside while he slept. The article says his dream was so incredibly real, he thought he'd actually eaten the toy.
It is a hilarious story, but it beautifully confirms what the Hungarian EEG study suggested. Dogs are actively replaying and experiencing their waking lives during REM sleep. When we see their paws twitching or their lips curling, it is because their motor cortex is firing, simulating the physical actions of running, chasing, or in Gus's case, chewing. Gus's brain was generating the complex sensory input of chewing that duck so vividly that upon waking, his physical reality simply didn't match his dream state. It proves how incredibly deep and complex their sleep architecture truly is.
And then we have the story of Bella, which is a bit more sobering but incredibly important for families to hear. Bella is a sweet, docile shelter pit bull, adopted by a loving family. They take her on her first big, exciting hiking trip. During the hike, they miss her subtle, quiet signals to stop. The yawning, the panting. She gets overwhelmingly tired. They get back home, and when a neighborhood child goes in to give Bella a tight hug, she gives a small, unthinking, defensive growl. The family was totally shocked, but they learned a vital lesson. Here's where it gets really interesting. The article states that a loving, tired dog has a much shorter fuse. We always hear the cliche, a tired dog is a good dog, assuming they are too polite or too physically exhausted to snap. But Bella's story proves the exact opposite. Can you elaborate on why sleep deprivation and extreme fatigue destroy a dog's mood and focus, and why we dangerously assume tired dogs are safe dogs?
This raises a profoundly important question about how we fundamentally misinterpret animal behavior. We assume tired means docile. We assume they lack the energy to react. But as we discussed earlier regarding the brain cup, an overtired dog is operating on a severely depleted central nervous system. Their threshold for tolerance, their ability to calmly process annoyances drops dramatically.
They just don't have the patience anymore.
Right. In Bella's case, she was physically exhausted from the massive hike, and her cognitive brain cup was completely overflowing from processing the new environment, the smells, the travel. When the child approached for a hug, which, it should be noted, is an action that physically restricts movement and can feel inherently threatening to any dog, Bella no longer had the cognitive bandwidth to process the hug as affection.
She just saw it as a threat.
Exactly. Her tired, stressed brain perceived it immediately as a threat, and she reacted with a defensive growl to protect her vulnerable state. A well-rested dog has the mental energy to inhibit their primal instincts and tolerate uncomfortable things. An exhausted dog simply does not. The family was smart, they didn't punish her. They realized their mistake and instituted a strict rule where Bella gets a quiet hour completely alone in a dark room after any big fun activity. That is exactly the right protocol.
And speaking of overtired dogs, we absolutely cannot leave this section without talking about the biggest myth of all. The zoomies. The source completely busts this myth wide open. We see a dog tearing around the house at 9 p.m., running over the couch, doing laps around the dining room table, acting totally frantic, and we think, oh, they still have extra energy, I should have walked them longer, I failed today. But the article says that assumption is entirely wrong. The zoomies are often a clear, glaring sign of severe overexhaustion.
Yes, and we need to look at the biology of what causes the zoomies. It is the canine equivalent of a second wind, but it is absolutely not a healthy one. When a dog is pushed far past their point of normal, healthy fatigue, their body realizes it is failing to stay awake. It perceives this extreme fatigue as a vulnerability. To counteract this, the brain triggers the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
What does that do?
This system aggressively dumps massive amounts of adrenaline and cortisol directly into the bloodstream. This sudden, violent spike in stress hormones causes the frantic, explosive, seemingly uncontrollable behavior we affectionately call the zoomies.
So it's not extra energy at all, it's a panic response.
Precisely. It is not extra stored energy. It is emergency reserve fuel. Preventing zoomies is crucial for long-term behavioral health because constantly relying on adrenaline spikes creates a vicious cycle of chronic stress and extremely poor sleep quality. When you see the zoomies, your dog does absolutely not need another walk. They do not need you to chase them. They need a quiet, dark room, dim lights, and an immediate and forced transition to sleep to allow those stress hormones to metabolize and clear from their system.
Knowing how crucial this deep sleep is for memory and mood, and how dangerous adrenaline-fueled exhaustion can be, how do we ensure our dogs actually get the high-quality rest they so desperately need? That brings us to fueling and tracking the rest cycle. The source outlines that getting good restorative rest comes down to what we put into the dog's body and how we monitor their internal systems. Let's start with diet, because the guide plainly states that poor diet equals canine fatigue.
Diet is the foundational building block of all physical and mental energy. The article compares it to putting bad fuel in a car, which is an apt analogy. If you feed an active dog a diet full of empty, cheap fillers, highly processed carbohydrates, and low-quality, non-bioavailable proteins, their body has to work incredibly hard just to digest it, gaining very little nutritional value. More importantly, they experience rapid, extreme spikes and catastrophic crashes in their blood sugar. They might have a manic burst of energy 30 minutes after eating, followed by profound, heavy lethargy. High-quality food provides complex carbohydrates for sustained energy release, healthy fats for brain health, and highly bioavailable proteins that actually repair muscle tissue. If your highly active dog is constantly lethargic, the very first thing to evaluate before even looking at their exercise routine or sleep schedule is the nutritional density and quality of their daily diet.
So it's not just about the calories. I like to think of it like putting cheap, watered-down gas in a high-performance sports car. The car will technically turn on, but it's going to sputter, stall, and eventually ruin the engine. And beyond diet, the article talks heavily about tracking. This is fascinating to me. Modern tech is entering the pet care space in a massive way. We now have smart collars, GPS trackers, and even microchips that track a dog's resting heart rates, their heart rate variability, and their sleep cycles in real time.
It's incredible how far the tech has come.
It really is. The data shows that a dog's heart rate should drop significantly during deep rest. If your phone app shows a high resting heart rate at night, the dog might be overtired or chronically stressed. But I have to ask you, with a healthy dose of skepticism, are we getting a little too obsessed with tech? Are we micromanaging our pets to the point where we're just making ourselves anxious? Or is seeing that nighttime heart rate drop actually a genuine game changer for identifying a stressed dog?
It is a completely valid concern. We certainly don't want to micromanage our pets to the point of transferring our own neuroses and anxiety onto them. However, from a veterinary and behavioral standpoint, I believe this specific technology is a genuine game changer. Here is why. Dogs are absolute masters at masking discomfort and stress. It is a survival trait. We might look at our dog lying on the rug and think they're sleeping soundly because their eyes are closed and they are quiet.
Yeah, they look fine to us.
Exactly. But if a smart collar shows that their resting heart rate is stubbornly hovering at 80 beats per minute instead of appropriately dropping down to 40 or 50 beats per minute, we suddenly have objective, undeniable data that their autonomic nervous system is stuck in a state of high alert.
It's like your engine is idling way too high.
Exactly. It completely removes the guesswork. It allows us to see the invisible internal toll that a stressful day at daycare, a frightening thunderstorm, or perhaps a hidden underlying illness is taking on their cardiovascular system. It gives the dog a voice they didn't have before.
And distinguishing between stress, normal fatigue, and actual illness is notoriously hard for the average owner. We touched on this earlier when we discussed the senior dog checklist, but the article lays it out so clearly for dogs of all ages. Is my dog tired or is my dog sick? The answer always comes back to how they bounce back.
The bounce back factor is the golden rule. A genuinely tired dog, even an exhausted one, will bounce back with renewed vigor and interest after a solid, uninterrupted nap and a good meal. A sick dog, however, will continue to act dull. They will refuse their normal food, they will ignore high-value treats, and they will lack enthusiasm for things they normally love, even after sleeping for 10 hours. And that is why tracking, whether through a high-tech smart collar or just your own careful, dedicated observation, is so critical. If you notice the recovery time is getting noticeably longer and longer, or if they're refusing that piece of chicken even after a long night's sleep, you are no longer dealing with simple fatigue. You are dealing with a medical issue that requires professional intervention.
So we have the right high-quality food, we are tracking their vitals and their bounce-back factor. But tech and diet are only part of the recovery equation. The ultimate key to actually achieving that vital REM sleep is the physical space the dog sleeps in. Which brings us to the final, incredibly practical advice from the Doggozila Guide, creating the ultimate recharging zone.
The physical environment heavily dictates the quality of the rest. You cannot possibly expect a dog to achieve that vulnerable, deep REM sleep where memory consolidation happens if their bed is situated in the middle of a highly trafficked, busy kitchen with kids running past, pots clanging, other pets walking over them, and the television blaring. The article strongly advises picking a quiet, secluded spot away from household noise, using a soft, supportive bed or a cozy, covered crate where they feel fully insulated and safe.
Let's talk deeply about the crate for a moment, because people have very strong, often mixed feelings about them. Some view them as cages. But the article dives into the psychology of the crate, or a dedicated quiet room. It explains exactly how calm spaces prevent overstimulation and actively aid recovery, especially during periods of high-energy training or chaotic household events.
A properly introduced, positively reinforced crate is absolutely not a cage. To the dog's psychology, it is a den. In the wild, canines naturally seek out small, enclosed, dark spaces to rest, usually under roots or in hollows, because it minimizes their vulnerability. In an open space, they have 360 degrees of perimeter to worry about. In a den, they only have to watch one single entrance.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
When we provide a cozy, covered crate in a quiet, dark room, we are deeply satisfying that primal psychological need for security. It actively lowers their cortisol levels. It allows their nervous system to completely power down because they no longer feel responsible for guarding the perimeter of a chaotic living room.
The guide also has specific, brilliant tips for calming energetic puppies during nap time. It reiterates that puppies get incredibly cranky when they need sleep, just like human toddlers. It suggests establishing a routine, a short, calm cuddle session, moving them to a quiet room with soft classical music or white noise, and providing a special chew toy to help them transition to sleep. And it makes a really strong counterintuitive point. Avoid vigorously exercising your dog right before bedtime.
That advice directly goes back to the arousal chemicals we discussed earlier. If you decide to play a vigorous, highly competitive game of tug-of-war with your dog right before bed, hoping to tire them out, you are doing the exact opposite. You are intentionally flooding their brain with adrenaline and dopamine. Those chemicals have a half-life. It takes significant time for them to dissipate from the bloodstream. Your dog will be physically panting, but mentally wired. Offering a chew toy or a lick mat, on the other hand, is a brilliant science-backed strategy. The physical, repetitive act of licking and chewing naturally stimulates the release of endorphins, which are deeply calming, soothing neurotransmitters in the dog's brain. It physically lowers their heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and bridges the difficult transition from an active state to a resting state.
So let me play devil's advocate for a moment, because this is something I struggle with. We love our dogs so much. They are our family. If a dog clearly wants to be near us all the time, following us from the kitchen to the bathroom to the living room, are we actually being bad, restrictive owners by forcing them to go rest in a quiet, separate room? Are we depriving them of our company and making them sad?
I hear that concern constantly, but we have to reframe it. If we look at the bigger picture of canine psychology, enforcing firm boundaries and creating mandatory calm spaces is actually the ultimate act of love and care. Dogs are highly social animals, yes, but they are also deeply opportunistic followers. If you are constantly moving around the house, they often feel socially obligated to move with you to protect the pack.
Like they're on guard duty.
Exactly. They suffer from severe canine equivalent fear of missing out. By creating a mandatory scheduled quiet zone and enforcing rest in a separate room, you are actively taking that heavy social burden off their shoulders. You are communicating to them, you are off duty, I am in charge of the perimeter, you are safe to sleep. It prevents the severe behavioral issues that stem directly from chronic sleep deprivation, like the tragic snapping we saw in Bella's story. Enforcing rest is not a punishment. It is a vital, life-saving health intervention.
That is such a reassuring, empowering perspective. It is entirely okay to be the parent and say, go to your room, you are off duty, take a nap. Well, we have covered an immense, fascinating amount of ground today, navigating through the complex biology, psychology, and practical insights provided by the Doggozila Magazine article. Let's do a quick synthesis of the major takeaways for everyone listening. First, do not ever trust your dog to tell you when they are tired, because their dopamine will lie to them. Watch for the subtle early cues, the displacement stress yawning, the heavy, uncontrollable distress panting, the sprawling out on cold surfaces. Check those vitals. If you press their gums and the pink color takes more than 2 seconds to return, or if their resting breathing rate is stubbornly over 40 breaths a minute, you need to intervene immediately.
And second, always remember the two separate cups of energy. You absolutely must respect the mental energy cup. A physical 5-mile walk is simply not enough for a smart dog. You must utilize complex sniffing games and puzzles to rapidly drain their brain glucose and achieve true restorative relaxation. Furthermore, respect their specific physical limitations, especially if you have a flat-faced brachycephalic breed that struggles desperately in the heat, or an older senior dog whose sleep patterns and bounce-back times are changing.
Absolutely. Protect them relentlessly from the heat. Always remember that tragic story of the bulldog overheating in a seemingly comfortable 81-degree living room. And when it comes to sleep, completely abandon the idea that the zoomies mean they need more exercise. Recognize the zoomies as a glaring red flag for adrenaline-fueled overexhaustion. Feed them a high-quality, bioavailable diet for steady fuel, track their resting heart rates if you can, and above all, create a quiet, safe, den-like space for them away from household chaos. This ensures they get that vital, memory-consolidating REM sleep so they don't wake up cranky, anxious, or metabolically stressed.
It all ultimately comes down to dedicated observation, deep empathy, and choosing to work intelligently with your dog's specific biology rather than fighting blindly against it.
To wrap up this incredibly deep dive, I want to leave you with one final deeply provocative thought from our expert. We spent a lot of time talking about how dogs use their REM sleep to process their day, tag their memories with emotion, and permanently stir those experiences in their cortex.
Yes, I want every owner to think deeply about this tonight. If your dog literally uses their sleep to process the emotional weight of the day, if they are sleeping on the fun you had together to wake up feeling secure and bonded, what kind of emotional memories are you actually feeding your dog right before they close their eyes? Are you feeding them a chaotic, loud, stressful environment full of adrenaline, or are you intentionally giving them a sense of profound peace, safety, and a fully empty mental cup to dream about?
That is something to truly reflect on tonight when your dog settles down for the evening. Thank you for listening, dear Brigadiers, and if you have any questions, visit the source article on Doggozila Magazine at doggozila.com. That was all for this episode, and until the next time, bye to all listeners of the Bark Brigade podcast.